For more than 60 years, America has crowned Dolly Parton the queen of country music. But behind that crown was a woman carrying more silence than the world ever knew. Her voice made millions believe that pain could be softened, loneliness could be sung through, and a hard life could still become something beautiful. The stages are quieter now. The rhinestones still shine, but the room she once came home to has changed forever. And one unsettling question remains. What happens when a woman spends a lifetime turning everyone else's sorrow into song? Behind Jolene, Coat of Many Colors, and I Will Always Love You, is a life marked by poverty, private illness, the motherhood she never had, and the painful loss of Carl Dean, the man who knew Dolly before the world needed Dolly Parton. Today, the question is no longer how she became a legend. It is whether the woman who gave America so much comfort ever found enough comfort for herself. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and leave a heart for Dolly Parton, the woman who spent a lifetime turning pain into music. A coat stitched from scraps became Dolly Parton's first lesson in shame, dignity, and love. Long before America crowned her the queen of country music, she was learning a truth that would follow her for the rest of her life. Poverty does not only empty a room, it teaches a child how it feels to be judged for surviving with less. Dolly Rebecca Parton entered a world that required endurance long before it offered fame. Born on January 19, 1946, her story began in Locust Ridge, a rugged enclave within the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, where she was the fourth of 12 children. Her first home was a primitive one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, and a mountain winter cold so sharp it seemed to press through the floorboards. Her family's poverty ran so deep that her parents famously paid the doctor who delivered her with a simple sack of cornmeal. She would later remember the crowded bed, the biting cold of those mountain nights, and the way she and her 11 siblings had to huddle under a single, worn quilt just to keep warm, finding in one another the only heat the cabin could offer. Summers gave them the river for washing, while winters brought frozen basins of water that burned against the skin, leaving the memory of that early struggle living quietly in her body for decades to come. Inside that crowded cabin, sorrow and responsibility took root early, shortening her childhood to make room for survival. In 1955, when Dolly was only 9, her baby brother Larry passed away shortly after birth, becoming less a memory than a permanent silence the family had to carry. By age 6, she was already acting as a second mother, tending to infants, hauling water from the creek, and watching her father work until his hands were raw to keep a house full of children from going hungry. Robert Lee Parton could not read or write, and that hardship became one Dolly never forgot. Years later, she would turn it into a living tribute through the Imagination Library, a free book program dedicated to her father's memory, transforming his quiet struggle into a gift for millions of children. School offered little refuge from the hardships of Locust Ridge. When her mother lovingly sewed her a winter coat from a box of rags, the children on the playground met her with laughter and rejection. Yet that small public humiliation became one of the first lessons that shaped her life. Dolly was not only poor, she had to learn how to carry shame with her chin lifted before the world ever taught her what fame meant. That wound became the spiritual blueprint for her 1971 masterpiece, Coat of Many Colors, proving that the sting of poverty did not live within the fabric itself, but in the eyes of those who failed to see the love sewn into it. Music eventually became her quiet rebellion, a private sanctuary where hunger slowly turned into melody and grief was given somewhere to go. By the time she was 7, she was already composing songs before she could fully spell them, using her voice against the freezing mountain winds and the weight of responsibility placed on her small shoulders. Decades later, from the far side of global fame, she would make clear that she had not written because she imagined a spotlight waiting for her. She wrote because songs gave her a place to put what childhood had asked her to carry. Even after her mother's passing in 2003 made performing her most personal songs feel heavier, she continued to sing, linking every word to love, absence, and memory. Dolly Parton did not leave the mountains behind. She carried them in the trembling warmth of a shared blanket, in the scraps her mother stitched into a coat, and in the songs that made a poor child's pain sound like grace. The world would remember the glittering icon on stage, but the music itself would always carry the cold floorboards, the shared quilt, the river water, and the child who learned to sing before she had any other way to stay warm. Hunger heard Dolly Parton long before Nashville ever did. As a barefoot 10-year-old singing through the cold hollers of Tennessee, her voice cut through the Great Smoky Mountains with a force that made passing strangers stop, hinting at a future where that same voice would command the grandest stages in the world. That year, 1956, began her first hard lesson in life on the road. Traveling with her Uncle Bill Owens to tiny radio stations and makeshift studios, their suitcases held little more than sandwiches and unrecorded songs. They slept on borrowed couches, in drafty rooms, and often in the back seat of a car parked on dark, quiet streets. A childhood rich in dreams, but poor in almost everything else. When graduation day arrived in the spring of 1964, there was no pause. The very next morning, she boarded a Greyhound bus to Nashville with a cardboard suitcase, $20, and a promise never to return empty-handed. But the city offered cold comfort. Doors shut fast, and many nights ended in a rented room so small she could reach the sink from her bed, staring at rain-slicked concrete and wondering if anyone in this town would ever believe in her. Recognition first reached Dolly in 1965, but it did not arrive as freedom. Her first contract at Monument Records quickly became an invisible wall. Label executives decided that her high, piercing voice was wrong for country music, pushing her instead into bubblegum pop. Inside the studio, under the flat glare of unfamiliar lights, Dolly had to record tracks that did not feel like her own. Happy, Happy Birthday Baby, and What Do You Think About Lovin'? The breaking point came during playback. Listening to the monitors, she heard clean notes, but the voice coming back sounded like a stranger, wearing her skin, stripped of the Tennessee mountains that had shaped her. It was not only the wrong song, it was the fear that Nashville might hear her voice and still miss the girl inside it. The singles flopped, and gatekeepers dismissed her as a small-town girl who did not fit the mold. Yet her fire did not go out. By day, she sang for tips in tiny clubs to cover rent. By night, she wrote on worn notepads by candlelight when the power was cut. Alongside Uncle Bill, she kept mailing demo envelopes to rooms that rarely answered until her breakthrough came from her pen. In 1966, their song, Put It Off Until Tomorrow, became a hit for Bill Phillips, forcing the industry to ask, "Who is Dolly Parton?" Defiance became her true introduction in 1967 with her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly, a title that sounded less like a greeting than a refusal to disappear. Her lyrics did not skim the easy surface of pop. They carried the truth of a young woman who had known hunger, grief, and the long walk through rooms where no one knew her name. Yet the industry still classified her as a mere girl singer, a decorative backup voice. They failed to realize that beneath the rising rhinestones was an iron will, and beneath the sweet smile was a songwriter who refused to let others decide who she was. Having lived through too much to let outsiders write her story, she made the choice that finally sounded entirely like her own in 1973. As she stepped away from the professional partnership that had helped make her visible, she recorded a goodbye so raw it crossed generations. I Will Always Love You. That song proved she carried her past not as a burden, but as armor, ensuring she would never again be reduced to the shadows others had built around her. From that moment, every closed door, every wrong song, and every lonely Nashville room seemed to gather behind one truth. Dolly Parton had not come to Nashville to be shaped into someone else's idea of a star. She had come to make the industry hear the girl from Locust Ridge. Yet the harder truth was still ahead. The more the world heard her, the fewer places remained where she could simply be silent and loved. Pressure found Dolly Parton even after the spotlight finally did. By 1970, she had carved a place on the Porter Wagoner Show, her voice entering living rooms across America each week beneath bright stage lights, smiles, and polished harmonies. Yet visibility was not freedom. Behind the duets, creative tension kept tightening. Dolly would later describe how carefully she had to measure herself inside Porter's world, remembering that she had to stay quiet because it was his show, not hers, until she finally reached the point where she could claim and own herself. In 1974, the breaking point came when she chose to leave Waggoner's show, a decision that hurt, precisely because the partnership had helped define her early career. She sealed that goodbye, not with anger, but with, "I will always love you," a farewell tender enough to hide the fracture underneath. In her later telling, after that painful break, she drove home as rain began to fall, and the tears came with it, not only from loss, but from the strange freedom that follows a necessary goodbye. Pain had already learned her melody a year earlier. In late 1973, Dolly released Jolene, a stripped-down, hypnotic plea that cut through the airwaves and refused to fade. It was more than a hit. It was proof that her storytelling could wound without raising its voice. The song's simplicity and her unshaken delivery forced even skeptics to hear the rare power behind the rhinestones. Still, chart toppers did not stop the industry from underestimating her. Dismissive producers, skeptical label executives, and critics tried to reduce her artistry to novelty. Many expected her to remain someone's duet partner, not a force in her own right. But Dolly's pen had become as unyielding as her voice. Between tours and television tapings, in hotel rooms and the backs of tour buses, she kept writing, turning rejection into anthems and pressure into songs that carried both polish and mountain truth. Each lyric became a way of refusing to be sidelined, a small private act of survival inside a business that kept asking her to stay smaller. Exhaustion became the hidden price of becoming undeniable. The mid-1970s brought relentless touring, radio promotion, recording deadlines, and the weight of proving herself in a male-dominated industry. Long hours under stage lights were followed by longer hours in studios, her voice pushed to its edge, her fingers aching from guitar strings, her image constantly judged by people who wanted easier formulas. Yet she refused to dull what made her real. In 1977, Here You Come Again became her first major crossover hit, reaching #1 on the country chart and breaking into the top 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. When Nashville purists accused her of abandoning country, the charge cut deeper because it came from the very world she had spent her life trying to honor. Dolly answered with the conviction that she was not leaving country. She was taking it with her. Then came 1980 and 9 to 5. On set, she famously found its working rhythm by clicking her long acrylic nails together, turning an ordinary habit into the pulse of a national anthem. Written during her film debut alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, the song topped the country, pop, and adult contemporary charts at the same time, transforming workplace frustration into a national rhythm. But triumph came with a punishing cycle. Filming by day, recording by night, promotion in between. As the industry shifted in the mid-1980s, she resisted chasing trends and stayed rooted in songwriting. Tennessee Homesick Blues in 1984 and Why'd You Come In Here Lookin' Like That in 1989 proved she could adapt without surrendering her voice. She would tell one interviewer that chasing trends would only get her lost in the crowd, and by the end of the decade, she had proved the opposite. Dolly Parton had widened the road beneath her own feet. The summit was built from sleepless nights, creative standoffs, aching hands, and private doubts she rarely allowed the crowd to see. She kept going, and in that refusal, she became more than a performer. She became a landmark, without surrendering the road that made her. Loss reached Dolly Parton at the very center of the music that had carried her through life. If her songs had a heartbeat, that steady rhythm had always belonged to Avie Lee, the mother who gave her stories, faith, tenderness, and the belief that poverty could never decide a child's worth. In December 2003, when Avie Lee passed away at the age of 80, something in Dolly's world shifted beyond the reach of any spotlight. She was still touring, releasing music, and smiling for cameras. But the woman who had stitched love into the first language of her heart was gone. Dolly would later describe the loss as if a light had gone out in her life. That light had once shone through a coat made from scraps of cloth, the famous coat of many colors. Avie Lee pieced together not merely with fabric, but with dignity, pride, and unconditional love. The song it inspired became one of Dolly's most cherished works, a ballad audiences embraced as proof that hardship could be carried with grace. But after her mother's passing, even the opening chords became difficult to bear. Standing before an audience, Dolly could hear the music begin, but in her mind, the stage disappeared. What returned was the cabin, the scraps, and her mother's hands moving through the cloth. It was no longer only a song. It was Avie Lee's voice, labor, and love coming back all at once. Sorrow did not arrive loudly. Dolly had been raised in a home where pain was carried with quiet strength, and she mourned Avie Lee in that same private language, in the spaces between concerts, interviews, hotel rooms, and backstage silence. In memory, the coat became more than an object. Each seam seemed to lead back to Avie Lee's hands, to the cabin, and to a kind of love poverty could not measure. This was the woman who had raised 12 children in a one-room cabin in Sevier County, sang while working, offered gentle wisdom in hard times, and encouraged Dolly to keep using her voice when life felt too heavy to hold. Losing her meant losing the foundation beneath the glitter. Yet Dolly kept bringing Avie Lee forward, speaking more openly about her influence, and often reminding audiences that her mother's spirit lived inside the best parts of her work. She remembered the songs Avie Lee sang through daily labor, the laugh that could fill a room no matter how little they had, and the voice that still visited her in dreams, where her mother was not only a memory but home itself. After Avie Lee was gone, Coat of Many Colors no longer belonged only to audiences. It became a doorway Dolly had to open carefully, because on the other side was the mother who had made poverty feel, if only for a moment, like something a child could survive with pride. For all the glitter and glory that followed her, this remained one of Dolly Parton's deepest truths. The greatest gift she ever carried was not fame, but a mother who taught her how to meet a hard world without letting it harden her heart. When Floyd was gone, something in Dolly Parton's music lost its answering voice. Among her siblings, he had been more than family. He was the rare brother who seemed to know where her melodies were headed before she had finished singing them. In Locust Ridge, Tennessee, they had once sat with a battered guitar between them, writing on scraps of paper, trading lines, until the words felt less composed than remembered. They were brother and sister, but also creative twins. Together, they carried pieces of their mountain childhood into music, most famously through Rockin' Years, the 1991 #1 hit that placed Floyd's quiet gift before the world. His name appeared in the credits of many tracks, his pen helping shape the voice millions believed belonged to Dolly alone. Then, in December 2018, Floyd Parton died at the age of 61, and one of the private rhythms behind her life fell silent. This was not only the loss of a brother, it was the loss of someone who could hear what she meant before she explained it, someone who understood the spaces between her words and the stories she chose not to say aloud. Grief did not become a spectacle. Dolly did not turn Floyd's passing into a public performance. There were no long televised farewells, only a brief family statement and a private goodbye where the Partons gathered not as country music royalty, but as children saying goodbye to one of their own. Rockin' Years seemed to belong to that silence differently now. No stage lights, no applause, only the memory of family voices carrying a song he had helped give the world. The ache needed no witness to feel real. It lived in the idea of harmony, trying to hold itself together while one voice was missing. In the months after, Dolly kept working, recording and performing, but the quiet around her seemed different. Floyd had been a bridge back to the mountains, the porch, the scraps of paper, the unfinished lines, and the girl she had been before fame made everything louder. Fame had given Dolly countless musicians, producers, and audiences. But Floyd belonged to a rarer category, the person who did not need the finished song to understand where the hurt began. for a woman who had always turned sorrow into song. Losing him felt like losing a map she had carried all her life. The chords they once shaped together no longer answered in the same way. And somewhere beneath Dolly's smile, beneath the glitter and applause, there remains a private verse only Floyd would have known how to finish. Floyd's passing reopened more than the wound of losing a brother. It brought Dolly back to another private absence she had carried for decades, the child she once imagined, but never got to hold. Motherhood haunted Dolly Parton like a song she could feel in her chest, but never bring fully into the world. When she married Carl Dean in 1966, she carried the quiet picture so many women carry before life begins rewriting it. A home softened by children, tiny shoes near the door, bedtime stories beneath warm quilts, little hands reaching for hers, and lullabies sung not to thousands of strangers, but to one child who would know her simply as Mama. That dream stayed with her, even as marquees lit up with her name. Then, in 1982, a private health crisis linked to endometriosis led to surgery that ended the possibility of bearing children. Dolly left the hospital, carrying a future that had been quietly taken from her. No first school mornings, no midnight calls from a child's room, no small arms around her neck. The loss did not arrive with headlines. It settled into the private hours after the cameras were gone. She later spoke of that period as one of the darkest of her life, a time when the smile the world trusted could not reach the nights she was surviving alone. It was not only the absence of children, it was the absence of the life she had imagined for herself long before fame ever asked anything from her. Carl could love her through that absence, but even the gentlest marriage could not give a name, a bedroom, or a bedtime voice to the child who never came. Stillness became the nursery she never filled. There were no giggles down the hallway, no soft footsteps, no tiny voice calling from the dark. Yet love that large did not disappear. It searched for somewhere else to live. Dolly poured it into her siblings' children, then into millions of children she would never meet through the imagination library, giving away books, encouragement, and hope, as if every package carried a piece of the tenderness once saved for her own child. She would later frame it with grace, believing perhaps God had widened her motherhood beyond one home and asked her to mother the world in another way. But grace did not erase the ache. It returned quietly in ordinary places. A store window filled with baby clothes, a child calling for a mother in a crowd, parents in her audience rocking babies while her songs moved through the room. Dolly rarely spoke of that wound without dignity, but its depth lived beneath the generosity. Love that has nowhere to go does not die. It changes shape. And for Dolly Parton, the lullaby she never sang to a child of her own became something larger and lonelier. A tenderness scattered through books, songs, and open hands, reaching millions while still guarding one room inside her heart, where no applause, no charity, and no public gratitude could ever sound like a child calling her mama. Pain did not end with the child Dolly Parton would never hold. Beneath that private absence, her body had begun a quieter battle, one no costume or spotlight could cover. By the early 1980s, when her public life seemed almost unstoppable, the private cost was already gathering beneath the glitter. The costumes sparkled, the songs kept finding radio, and Hollywood had begun opening doors. To the public, Dolly looked like motion, laughter, and light. Away from the curtain, the story was different. Touring, family strain, and emotional pressure were wearing her down. What first seemed like simple exhaustion became pain, later linked to endometriosis, a condition that brought suffering and the fear of living inside a body she could no longer fully trust. Some nights, she still stepped to the microphone, smiled into the lights, and sang through a hurt no audience could see. Every lobby, dressing room, camera line, and polite smile required another layer of concealment. The deeper wound lived where no audience could reach. Alongside the illness was what Dolly would later describe as an affair of the heart, not a public scandal, but a private attachment she could neither explain publicly nor carry lightly. Added to family tensions and the machinery of fame, Even the woman who had fought her way out of the Smoky Mountains began to feel the weight closing around her. In 1982, after a health crisis and surgery, she woke to a truth deeper than professional rejection. Motherhood might be gone for good. She smiled for cameras. But inside, she was mourning the small rituals she had once imagined. School mornings, sleepy voices, a child reaching for her in the dark. It was grief without a grave. The spiral took away more than health. Work began to fall away. Concerts stopped, the guitar stayed untouched, and the notebooks went quiet. The woman who had always outrun darkness found herself staying in bed for days, not from laziness, but because the world outside felt too heavy to enter. She later framed that season not as sadness, but as numbness, a gray emptiness where joy used to live. People near her could see the change, a thinner frame, a dimmer gaze, laughter that arrived late and left quickly. Mercy arrived almost too quietly to be believed. One afternoon, alone at home, Dolly felt the room closing in, the kind of heaviness that can make pain feel larger than every reason to keep moving. Then she heard small paws moving toward her. Popeye, her little dog, had found her. He looked up with the plain need of a creature asking her to stay present for one more moment, and that tiny heartbeat pulled her back from a thought she knew she had to step away from. She broke down, letting grief move through her, instead of sealing it behind a smile. The road back did not come quickly. She sought treatment, leaned into faith, and returned to writing not as a career move, but as a way of sewing herself together again. The songs that followed carried a deeper weight, shaped by darkness rather than glitter. Looking back, Dolly has treated that season as one of the most humbling chapters of her life. It taught her that legends can fracture in private, that joy can be rebuilt by inches, and that sometimes survival is not a grand anthem, but one small living sound in a quiet room, reminding you to stay. After the private storms her body and heart had carried, Dolly Parton still had one shelter left. Carl Dean, the man who knew her before the world turned her name into a monument. Grief changed its shape when Carl was no longer there. For nearly 6 decades, he had been the one person she could trust to love her outside the legend, outside the rhinestones, outside the machinery that made her name a brand. To the world, she was an American icon. To Carl, she was the woman at home in a faded housecoat, the laugh that arrived before the punchline, the hand he could reach for in the dark. He had been the still point in a life of buses, stages, cameras, and applause, the man who let her be ordinary when the world needed her to be dazzling. When he passed away in 2025, at the age of 82, the loss did not feel like a public ending. It felt like a door closing inside the only room where Dolly never had to perform. Every earlier loss had taken something from her. A brother, a mother, a shared melody, a child she never held, a body she had once trusted. Carl's death took something different. It took the witness to the woman beneath all of it. The announcement was brief. The family asked for privacy, and behind that privacy was the kind of grief no spotlight could soften. Coffee still waiting to be poured, a table still standing where 2 people had once begun the morning, and one chair that would never be filled the same way again. Absence became the language of the days that followed. Dolly, who had spent her life lifting rooms with a smile, now had to move through rooms shaped by what was missing. Curtains could stay drawn, a phone could ring unanswered. Condolences could arrive from every direction, but none of them could replace the voice that had known her before the world learned how to claim her name. Music, the refuge that had carried her through poverty, illness, family loss, and the long ache of a life without children of her own, suddenly had to carry something even heavier. She could thank the public, and she did, with the grace people had come to expect from her. But grief at this depth still returned to the kitchen sink, the quiet hallway, and the small domestic spaces where habit kept reaching for someone no longer there. Carl's farewell remained private, as he had lived privately, away from the noise he had avoided for most of their marriage. No crowd could explain what he had been to her. The proof lived in ordinary rituals: coffee at dawn, small jokes in the kitchen, familiar footsteps down a hallway, shared faith, and the comfort of someone who never needed the stage version of Dolly to understand the woman underneath. Their love had never depended on public display, and that made the goodbye feel even more intimate. It was not a celebrity widow mourning a famous husband. It was a woman losing the private doorway back to herself. Memory gave Dolly the only language large enough to hold him. In the public note she shared after his passing, she thanked those who had sent messages, cards, and flowers, then placed Carl in God's hands with the faith that had steadied her since childhood. Soon after, she dedicated "If You Hadn't Been There" to him, calling him the star of her life story, a phrase quiet enough to feel true and large enough to hold nearly 60 years. The song did not need theatrical sorrow. Its ache came from the plain fact that someone had stood beside her, behind her, and beneath the life everyone else applauded. But after the tributes faded, the harder grief would have been waiting in smaller places. The empty side of a room, the table set by habit, the doorway where she might turn to say one more thing, the guitar resting nearby, wordless for once, in a house that had heard every kind of song. Carl's death was not only the loss of a husband, it was the loss of the one home where Dolly Parton never had to earn love by singing beautifully, smiling brightly, or being strong for anyone. And that may be the cruelest silence left behind. Not the absence of applause, not even the end of a long marriage, but the absence of the one person who knew Dolly before the world needed Dolly Parton, and who never required her to turn pain into anything beautiful before he could love her. Today, at 80, Dolly Parton stands not only as a music legend, but as one of the rare American artists whose fortune has become an extension of her values. Forbes estimated her net worth at about $450 million, with Dollywood, her music catalog, publishing, licensing, books, food products, and business partnerships all helping build a life that looks dazzling from the outside. But the more meaningful inventory of Dolly's life was never only financial. It was what the money could protect: privacy, family memory, creative ownership, and the right to come home without asking the public for permission. Her real estate tells that story better than any balance sheet. Her longtime Brentwood, Tennessee residence outside Nashville has been described as a deeply private compound with a 23-room home built on roughly 70 acres, a place she and Carl Dean shaped long before fame fully hardened around her name. Over the years, the property has been reported to include barns, a swimming pool, a tennis court, and private spaces set far enough back from the road to give her what fame rarely allowed: distance. Yet the deeper truth is not square footage. It is the emotional architecture of the place. After Carl's passing, that home became more than a mansion. It became the last physical map of a marriage that had survived by staying mostly unseen. Coffee, still remembering two people, a chair feeling louder than applause, and a guitar nearby carrying every song except the one that could bring him back. Beyond Brentwood, Dolly's property history reaches back through Tennessee and California. A former Nashville bungalow, property ties near Sevierville and the Smoky Mountains, and a former Idlewild, California mountain cabin that she and Carl transferred to Ronald McDonald House in 2023. Even her known car history carries old-school glamour, including a 1997 Cadillac Delegance associated with her public collection history. But none of these assets feel like trophies in the ordinary sense. They are traces of a woman who understood both spectacle and shelter, who could wear jewels under stage lights, yet still build her life around privacy, faith, family, and a place to come home to when the crowd disappeared. Even now, Dolly Parton's life has not gone still. It has simply learned to move more carefully. Dolly first postponed her Las Vegas return because of health challenges, then canceled the rescheduled 2026 dates, saying she still had healing to do while reassuring fans she was improving. Still, she continues to work with discipline, glamour, humor, and the unmistakable resolve of someone who has never confused slowing down with surrender. In 2026, she opened Dollywood's 41st season, launched her Cup of Ambition coffee brand with Community Coffee, and appeared at Dolly's Tennessean travel stop in Cornersville, a 50,000 square foot roadside project with food, coffee, music, EV charging, a dog park, and Tennessee hospitality built into its design. Through the Imagination Library, her giving has grown beyond sentiment into measurable legacy. By 2026, more than 300 million free books had reached children across 5 countries. Dolly has no biological children, yet her life keeps answering motherhood in a wider language. Godchildren, nieces, nephews, young artists, readers she will never meet, and dreamers who may still inherit her courage. That is why her ending cannot be measured only in money, houses, cars, wills, or awards. The real question is not who receives the fortune, but who carries the tenderness behind it. And after Carl, even that tenderness feels different, because the woman who gave so much of herself to strangers must now move through rooms where the one person who knew her first is no longer waiting. When the final curtain comes, Dolly Parton's truest estate may be every child who opens a book, every mountain kid who refuses shame, every listener who gets through one more lonely night because a song made pain feel less lonely. If her story has stayed with you, tell us which part you would carry forward: the music, the generosity, the love for Carl, or the stubborn grace of a woman who turned a hard life into light for others. May you and the people you love be blessed with steady health, quiet happiness, and the kind of peace that stays with you after the music fades.